didn't judge Darnell for who he was. They judged him for the patch on a stranger's back. And that decision? That was the beginning of something they couldn't take back. It was a Thursday morning in Modesto, California. The kind of morning where the sun doesn't rise, it attacks. By 9 a.m., the concrete already radiated heat like a stovetop, and the air in Vince's custom cycles hung heavy with the smell of oil, rubber, and baked metal. Darnell Cooper had been part of that shop longer than some of the younger guys had been out of high school. 14 years of showing up early, never missing a day, same black boots, same thermos with half-sweet coffee, and that same silent head nod to anyone who walked in after him. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the type to brag. He didn't need to. His work spoke louder than any words could. If you'd ever seen Darnell break down a carburetor blindfolded or tune an engine just by listening to the throttle, you'd understand. He didn't just fix bikes, he understood them. He was the kind of mechanic you didn't second guess, because he'd probably already fixed the mistake you hadn't noticed yet. That morning, like a dozen others, Vince yelled across the garage, "Darnell, you're up front. Walk in. Rear belt's toast." Darnell wiped his hands on a rag, gave a quick nod, and headed toward the bay door. And that's when he saw it. A 2005 Harley Dyna Super Glide. Dusty, loud, mean, the kind of bike that looked like it had stories it wasn't ready to tell. But it wasn't the bike that made Darnell slow down. It was the vest. Faded denim, frayed at the seams, and stitched across the back in big red and white letters, Hell's Angels. Modesto chapter. Darnell had worked on bikes owned by sheriffs, ex-cons, pastors, punks, dentists who thought they were outlaws on the weekends. He didn't care. If you respected the bike and your card cleared, you were a customer. End of story. The rider stepped forward. White guy, late 40s maybe, arms covered in ink, skin weathered like he'd lived outside more than in. His eyes were calm but hard. "You Darnell?" the man asked. "That's me." Guy out back said, "You're the only one here who actually knows what he's doing." Darnell gave a half smile. "Depends what you're trying to get done." "Belt snapped just outside city limits," the man said, glancing at his Harley. "She's popping and sputtering too. Might be the timing." Darnell knelt beside the bike. Even without touching it, he could already spot the wear, the damage, the telltale signs of a hard ride. "You ride her like you stole her," he said with a grin. The man chuckled. "Is there any other way?" And that was it. No more questions, no posturing, just respect. Two men who knew the language of engines and grease and heat. Darnell wheeled the bike in. Over the next hour, they barely spoke, but everything they said mattered. Talk of cam chains, spark plugs, and California heat. Royce, that was the man's name. He didn't offer a last name, and Darnell didn't press. In their world, last names were optional. Honesty wasn't something you said, it was something you showed. Darnell replaced the shredded belt, retuned the timing, cleaned the air filter, tightened the chain, and made sure every bolt was holding. By the time he finished, Royce was smiling. "She already feels better, and I haven't even sat on her yet." Darnell smirked. "She'll hold. Just don't act like she's bulletproof." Royce reached out a calloused hand. "Appreciate it, man. You know, people see the patch and freeze up. You didn't flinch, you just did the work." Darnell shook his hand, firm and steady. "I fix bikes. That's my job. Doesn't matter what patch you wear." And for a second, the garage felt still. A mechanic and a rider, two men from very different worlds, bound by something real. The sound of the Harley roaring to life cut through the silence like a dog off its leash. Royce peeled out of the lot, dust kicking up behind him. But someone else had been watching. Zach. Young guy, maybe 22, thought he was funny, thought he was slick, and that's where it all started. Zach had snapped a photo of Darnell crouched by Royce's bike, vest in full view, captioned it on Instagram. "Guess who's patching up the Angels today?" No warning, no heads up. He didn't post it to start trouble. At least, that's what he told himself. But trouble doesn't ask for permission. By the next morning, something felt off. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but Darnell felt it. fewer people looking him in the eye, fewer greetings. Vince walked right past him without a word. In 14 years, that had never happened. At lunch, Darnell sat on the same old bench behind the shop, alone, as usual. Halfway through his sandwich, Zach strolled out, phone in hand, grinning. "Yo, Coop," he said. "You see the comments on my story yesterday?" Darnell raised an eyebrow. "What story?" Zach turned the screen. There it was, the photo. Darnell and the bike, the vest. The caption, "Darnell's switching teams. Guess we call him Big Red now." Underneath, a dozen comments. "Yo, ain't that shop affiliated with the Vagos? Better watch yourself." Hope he brought backup. Darnell stood up, slowly, carefully. "You posted this?" Zach shrugged. "It's a joke, man. Nobody thinks it's real. Chill." But that didn't matter, because jokes don't stay jokes once people believe them. That afternoon, a regular customer came in for a tire install. When the service rep told him Darnell was available, the man paused, looked out at the bay, and said, "Yeah, could I get someone else?" And that was just the beginning of what was coming. The next morning, things went from awkward to unmistakable. One customer stood at the front counter, glancing nervously toward the back, like Darnell had a weapon tucked under his shirt. Another guy? He flat out said he'd come back next week if someone else was available. No hello, no thank you. Just that quiet shift in tone that tells you you're being treated different, and nobody wants to say it out loud. And Vince, the boss, the man Darnell had worked beside for almost a decade and a half, still hadn't said a word. But Darnell wasn't new to this. He knew how fast things could turn in a place like Modesto. You don't need a headline or a news story. All it takes is a sideways glance and a whispered comment. Suddenly, you're not the guy who knows bikes. You're that guy, the one they talk about behind closed doors. By the end of the shift, the tension had crawled under his skin like sandpaper. So Darnell wiped his hands, walked straight to Vince's office, and shut the door behind him. "You got a minute?" he asked. Vince didn't even look up. "You working on that Buell?" "I was. Now I'm here." Vince leaned back, arms crossed. "All right, what's on your mind?" "That photo, the one Zach posted yesterday." Vince's jaw tensed like he was chewing on a response that wouldn't go down easy. "You've got a lot of nerve bringing that to me, Darnell." Darnell blinked. "Come again? You think I like getting calls from old customers asking if we work with outlaw clubs now? You think that's good for the shop?" "I fixed a man's bike," Darnell said, calmly but firmly. "That's all I did, and you know it." "Yeah," Vince replied. "You fixed it in full view of the whole shop, patch and all, big smile on your face." Darnell stepped forward, fists tight at his sides. "So, what are you saying? We turn away customers now based on what they wear?" Vince stood too, voice flat. "I'm saying it's not a good look. Not for you, not for us." But that's when something snapped in Darnell. Not loudly, just something quiet inside. A realization. "Oh," he said. "So you didn't mind when I worked on that Triumph last month, the one owned by the guy with the swastika on his neck. You didn't care when the dude with the Confederate flag keychain dropped off his Honda. But now, you got a problem?" Vince didn't answer, and that silence, that was louder than any argument. Darnell turned to leave. But then Vince said it, 5 words that hit harder than any engine backfire. "Darnell, I'm letting you go." He stopped mid-step, turned. "You're what?" "I'm letting you go." No warning, no sit-down talk, no write-up. Just done. Darnell stared at him, jaw tight. "You're firing me for doing my job?" Vince looked down, staring at some meaningless paperwork, like it could speak for him. "It's just not a good fit anymore." "A fit?" Darnell's voice cracked. "I trained half those guys out there. I stayed late, worked holidays, took a pay cut when you said the shop was struggling, and now I'm not a good fit?" Vince still wouldn't meet his eyes. "It's not personal. Everything about it is personal," Darnell said. The air in the office felt thick, like it couldn't move fast enough for the heat and the anger sitting in it. Darnell took a breath. "You know what this is," he said quietly. "It's not about a photo. It's about fear. You're afraid of what people think they saw, not what actually happened. Still, Vince said nothing. Instead, he opened a drawer, pulled out a thin envelope, and slid it across the desk. "Final check," he said, "plus vacation hours." Darnell didn't even look at it. You ever stop to think what this says to the young guys in that shop? What they learn watching you do this? Vince finally looked up. "I'm thinking about keeping the doors open, Darnell. That's what I'm thinking about." There was nothing left to say. Darnell turned and walked out, slow and silent. The click of the door behind him hit harder than a slammed one ever could. The shop felt colder than the AC could explain. Eyes followed him, some curious, some embarrassed, some pretending they hadn't heard a thing. Zach was pretending to organize coolant on the shelf. He couldn't even look Darnell in the face. Back at his station, Darnell unlocked the toolbox he'd built over 15 years, wrench by wrench, socket by socket, every piece paid for with sweat and patience. He packed slow, like every click of the drawer was a message. "I earned this." On the way out, he stopped at the time clock, punched out one last time, said nothing. Outside, the heat smacked him in the face. He sat behind the wheel of his old Silverado, keys resting on the dash, staring into nothing. The engine ticked as it cooled. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text. "Heard what happened. That was wrong, bro. I'm sorry." No name, no courage, just guilt. He tossed the phone on the seat and leaned back. That night, he didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling fan, feeling the weight of silence louder than any machine he'd ever worked on. 15 years. 15 years of loyalty, busted knuckles, missed birthdays, skipped lunches, erased because someone took a photo and someone else got nervous. But Darnell wasn't broken. He was furious. And underneath that anger, something harder, something sharper, resolve. Because if he didn't figure out who really started all this, he'd never clear his name. And he wasn't about to let a joke be the final chapter in his story. The next morning, his body still moved like it had a job to get to. Coffee, shower, boots on. But this time, no shop, no clock to punch. Just silence. Another text buzzed in. "That was messed up. You good?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys, loaded up his toolbox, and drove toward town, not to find work, to find answers, and maybe, just maybe, to remind Modesto who he really was. Skip was white, pushing 60, with a bad knee and the kind of gut you earn from a lifetime of hard work and bad coffee. But no matter what, he never treated Darnell like anything less than an equal. Over the years, they'd done some side gigs together, shared a beer once or twice at weekend cookouts. The kind of man who spoke plain and watched careful. So when Darnell pulled up to Skip's auto, the old man spotted him right away, stepped out from under the hood, wiping his hands on a towel so dirty it looked like it had been through 3 wars. "You look like you just buried someone," Skip said, squinting into the sun. "Just got fired," Darnell replied, voice dry, "for doing my job." Skip raised an eyebrow. "Heard some rumblings. Something about a biker?" Darnell gave a short nod. Guy walked in wearing a Hell's Angels vest. Needed a timing belt. I fixed his bike. That's it. Skip leaned against the doorway and exhaled slow. "Let me guess." Some punk snapped a pic, twisted the story, and Vince folded like a cheap chair. That about sums it up. They stood there in silence, not awkward, just heavy. The kind of silence you share with someone who already understands. Skip finally said, "I hate to say it, but I've seen this movie before. You're a black man. He was a white biker. Folks fill in the blanks, and when things get hot, they don't want the smoke. They just let you burn for it." Darnell didn't respond. He didn't have to. The truth had already been spoken. "You need anything?" Skip asked. "Money? Work?" Darnell shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I'm not done with this yet." That night, Darnell sat at the kitchen table with the lights off except for one lamp above. Just him, his phone, and the photo Zach had posted. It was still up, still gathering comments like rot on a piece of fruit. Some were jokes, others weren't. So Vince's shop works with gang affiliates now? Knew there was something shady about that dude. Hope they got security cameras. He scrolled through the usernames. Most were local. People he'd seen around town. People he'd nodded to in line at the gas station or waved at through a shop window. And then he saw it. At Reeves Body Paint 209, a rival body shop across town. The repost was bold, almost smug. Our team keeps it clean, no gangs, no questions. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a dumb joke that got out of hand. This was used, weaponized. Someone had waited for this. Darnell sat back, breathing slow, staring at that caption. Vince hadn't defended him, hadn't corrected the story. He'd just let it grow teeth. So Darnell opened his old black notebook, the one he kept receipts and part numbers in. This time, he started logging usernames, dates, screenshots, every comment, every repost. Not out of spite, not for revenge. He was building a record, piece by piece. The truth. And then, knock knock, 2 heavy thumps at the front door. Darnell stood, moved slow, quiet, opened the door. There he was. Royce, the rider. Same vest, same eyes. Different energy. I heard what happened, Royce said, calm, controlled. Darnell didn't say anything, just held the door open far enough to let him in. No words, no need. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the sound of Royce's boots on hardwood. He looked around, like he didn't expect the place to feel so normal. A clean table, family photos, fresh coffee still lingering in the air. Nothing dramatic, just a man's life interrupted. I saw the post, Royce finally said. Didn't take long before it made the rounds. Darnell folded his arms, leaned against the wall. Doesn't matter what's true when the lie sounds better. Royce nodded slowly. Yeah, people love a story. Don't care if it's real. Then Royce locked eyes with him. No blink, no flinch. You lost your job over that? Fired the next day, Darnell said. No conversation, no warning, just bad optics. Royce's jaw tensed. He pulled out his phone and scrolled. Ever stop to ask who wanted that to happen? Darnell blinked. What do you mean? Royce took a seat at the table, slid his phone around. There's a guy I used to know, Trevor Baines, loudmouth, ran bodywork near the freeway, always wanted to be a patched-in rider, but nobody ever let him in. Couldn't be trusted. I heard he was working out of a place called Reeves Body Paint, Darnell said, jaw tightening. Yeah, that's him. Royce nodded. Word is he's been trying to run Vince out for years. Said the shop wasn't real anymore. Said it lost the true rider feel. This was his chance. All he needed was a crack. Darnell stared at the photo again. At the repost. Trevor had grabbed Zach's post, pushed the narrative, and Vince, he didn't stop it. He didn't defend his mechanic. He let it roll. Royce leaned forward. He reached out to some of my old guys. Asked if I was working with your shop. Next thing I know, he's reposting your photo, talking like we're blood brothers. Darnell looked up. Why are you telling me this? Royce stood, serious now. Because you didn't treat me like a stereotype. You didn't ask questions. You didn't flinch. You just fixed my bike. That matters more than you think. They walked to the door. Royce paused before stepping out. You get the truth straight, he said. Let me know. I don't mind setting the record right. Whatever it takes. The door clicked shut behind him. And in that quiet, something shifted. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a setup, a calculated one. And Darnell knew exactly where to start next. He didn't sneak in through the side door like he used to. He walked straight through the front of Vince's custom cycles. Head high, folder in hand, fire in his chest. Vince looked up from the register, face already tightening. The hell are you doing here? He snapped. Darnell didn't flinch. He calmly placed the folder on the counter. This, he said, tapping the cover, is everything. Screenshots, timestamps, reshares. Dozens of comments traced and logged. Most of them led straight to Trevor Baines. Reeves Body Paint. The man had been gunning for Vince's shop for years, and now he'd found his wedge. Vince didn't speak right away. His eyes danced between the folder and Darnell like he didn't know whether to read it or throw it out the door. And then Darnell added the kicker. "Oh, and the one who gave him the photo? Zach, the kid you kept on while cutting me loose, might want to ask him how much Trevor paid for that shot." Vince's face twitched, like he'd been slapped but didn't want to admit it. "You saying Zach sold you out?" he asked. "I'm saying," Darnell replied evenly, "you fired the wrong man." Vince slowly opened the folder. Inside were everything he'd been too scared to look for. Comment threads from burner accounts, a repost trail, a message between Zach and a number tied to Trevor's shop. The image had been sent directly from Zach's phone. Sold for a couple $100. That was all it took. Vince ran a hand over his face. "I didn't know." Darnell stared at him. "You didn't want to know." The weight of it all started to show in Vince's shoulders. His voice dropped low. People were calling. Customers we've had for years. My name was on the line. "So you threw me under the bus," Darnell said, "because you panicked." "I made a bad call under pressure. Doesn't mean it was the right one." "No," Darnell said, "it doesn't." Just then the door swung open. Every head in the shop turned. Royce Benton walked in, vest on, boots dusty, shades hanging from his collar like he wanted people to see exactly who he was. He didn't wait to be greeted. He walked up beside Darnell, slapped down a neat stack of glossy flyers, and raised his voice. "You want to know who I am?" he said, loud enough to hit every corner of the shop. "My name's Royce Benton. I ride with the Modesto chapter. Been clean since 2011. I run a halfway house for ex-cons out in Ceres. That man right there," he pointed at Darnell, "treated me with more respect than half this damn city. And you fired him for working on my bike? That's coward work." Silence. Royce stepped in closer to Vince, voice now low and deliberate. "You know how many of your customers got brothers, sons, nephews who've been locked up? Folks trying to do right? You gonna fire all them too when someone starts whispering?" Vince said nothing. Royce scanned the room, then looked back at Darnell. "You open your own spot? You let me know. I'll bring every rider I know your way." He nodded, firm, and walked out without another word. Like he owned the place. Vince slumped into the stool behind the counter and rubbed his eyes. "I messed up." Darnell didn't say anything. He didn't need to. "I can try to fix this," Vince offered. "Put out a statement. Talk to the press. You come back, we get ahead of it." But Darnell was already shaking his head. "I'm not coming back." Vince looked up, startled. "Why not?" "Because when it mattered," Darnell said, "you didn't have my back. Now that the smoke's clearing, you just want to protect your name." He reached for the folder, tucked it under his arm. "I can't work in a place where loyalty only works one way." And with that, he turned and walked to the front door. He paused before stepping outside. "You really want to make this right?" he said, not turning around. "Start by telling the truth, loud and clear." And then he was gone. But Darnell wasn't done, because if this town had turned its back on him, he was going to show them exactly what rebuilding looked like. The next week moved fast. Darnell didn't sit still. He wasn't built for that. He started making calls, knocking on doors, reaching out to people who knew him, people who remembered how their bikes ran after he touched them, people who didn't care about drama. They cared about honesty, skill, and straight-up work. One of the first to show up? Royce. He wasn't bluffing. He brought riders. Word spread. Black riders. Latino riders. A few quiet white boys with loud engines and no time for politics. Outlaws, veterans, solo travelers. Because at the end of the day, they all wanted the same thing. A mechanic they could trust. By Friday, Darnell had 4 bikes in his driveway and a 5th being trailered in from Stockton. No fancy shop, no logo. Just a folding table, a jack lift, an old plastic parts bin, and hands that knew exactly what to do. It was raw, it was humble, but it was real. Then the story hit the local news. Mechanic fired after helping biker. Was it fair? They didn't get every detail right, but the heart of it was there. Zach had leaked the photo. Reeves' body paint had pushed the smear. And Vince? He gave a quote, voice shaky, eyes down. I made the wrong decision. I regret it. But by then, Darnell was already building something better. I made the wrong call, Vince had said. I let fear talk louder than facts. And for once, Darnell believed him. Not because Vince said it perfectly, but because of what came after. The calls started flooding in, some from reporters, some from old clients who admitted they'd stayed silent when it mattered. A few just said, "Man, we saw the news, that was wrong." But then came the call that made Darnell stop mid-step. Her name was Charlene Morales, retired parole officer, ran a nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated folks get back on their feet, especially those who used to ride. Said she had a few guys with tools, talent, and time. What they didn't have was a place that would give them a shot. "You build something," she said. We'll send you work. Good men just need a break." For the first time in weeks, Darnell sat in silence, not out of anger, but because something heavy finally lifted. The bitterness didn't vanish, but it cracked, enough to breathe again. That weekend he called Skip, borrowed a corner of an old junkyard beside the lot. Nothing fancy, but it was space. Skip said he'd even help pour concrete if it came to that. "City still owes me for that drainage mess from 2002 anyway," he joked. They strung up a tent, dragged out work lights, pulled tools from boxes older than some of the bikes. By Monday, riders started showing up. One of them was Marcus Breitheit, 39, fresh out after doing time for a bar fight that went too far. 2 shops had already turned him away that week. Darnell handed him a wrench. "Ever pulled apart a primary?" Marcus smirked. "Not in a while, but I still remember. That moment, it mattered. This wasn't just work anymore. It was dignity. It was community. It was about showing up for each other." Later that night, Darnell took a paintbrush and quietly updated the handmade nameplate on the garage door. Cooper's Rebuild and Repair. Underneath, in red letters, no judgment, just work, but the story wasn't done writing itself. The following Monday, just after noon, a matte black Ford F-250 pulled onto the gravel. Darnell was halfway under a Yamaha V-Star, socket wrench in hand, when he heard the door shut. He slid out, wiped his hands, and looked up. Vince. No clipboard, no excuses. Just jeans, a wrinkled shop tee, and regret written all over him. Darnell said nothing. Vince took in the sight. Bikes under tarps, tools on plastic shelves, a couple riders sipping from paper cups, music playing low in the background. It wasn't polished, but it felt alive. "You built this fast," Vince muttered. "Didn't have time to waste," Darnell replied. There was a pause. Then Vince spoke. "I came to say something. Maybe late, maybe it doesn't matter, but I'm going to say it anyway." Darnell crossed his arms. "I got scared," Vince admitted. "Not of you, not really. I got scared of the talk, the looks. Thought I was protecting the shop, but I didn't protect you. And that place? You made it better. I never told you that. I should have." Darnell's voice was steady. "You done?" Vince nodded. "Yeah." "Then hear this," Darnell said, stepping forward. "You didn't just fire me. You made it okay for everybody else to turn their backs. You made silence feel normal, and that doesn't disappear with a quote in the paper." Vince swallowed hard. "I know. I won't ask you to come back. I wouldn't if I were you. I just wanted to say what I should have said then." He paused. "If you need anything, tools, lifts, scrap, seriously, it's yours." Then he turned, walked back to the truck, and drove off. Darnell stood there a while, watching the taillights disappear down the road. He turned back to the garage. Inside, Marcus was helping a teenage kid clean an air filter. Royce was laughing near the workbench, showing a younger rider how to patch a punctured tire. And on the wall, someone had taped up a sign. "Your past ain't a problem here. We just fix things." Later that week, Darnell found an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, one handwritten note. "You were done wrong. You didn't fold. Much respect." Enclosed is a token of support from those who ride. Tucked beneath it, a check for $5,000. Signed simply, Modesto Chapter. Darnell sat on the porch for a long time, holding that envelope, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. The same patch that got him fired, was now the reason his shop might grow. Funny how life works. By the end of the month, Cooper's was humming. Not with hype, not with noise, but with something stronger. Trust. Riders who'd given up on mechanics came back. People who'd heard the story came through just to shake his hand. And some who'd once stayed quiet finally spoke up. Darnell didn't chase revenge. He chased purpose. And in that, he found something no paycheck had ever given him. His voice, his peace, his pride. He didn't need to shout. He let his work speak. And this time, everyone listened, because a reputation, that can be taken in a second. But respect, that's earned, rebuilt, and protected with every choice you make. So now let me ask you, if you were in that shop that day, would you have stayed silent, or would you have said something? Because sometimes the real damage isn't caused by hate, it's caused by silence. And silence can cost a man everything. What would you have done